Next on Unsolved Mysteries. At a remote campground, a young man has a strange encounter with a beautiful blonde woman. And then...
What are you looking at, man? What's your problem, man? What's your problem?
After a huge explosion at a Navy ammo dump, 50 sailors refused to continue unloading bombs. They're in prison. But was it really a mutiny? This little girl had a rare disease, and doctors thought that she would die by the age of 10. And then she met Father Ralph DiOrio. And a woman's search for her missing grandmother reveals a dark family secret hidden for almost 100 years. There is nothing like a good mystery. And you know what? They're even better when they're true. I'm Dennis Farina. Join me for an hour of Unsolved Mysteries. The Angeles National Forest. Nearly 700,000 acres of wilderness just outside Los Angeles. For city residents, it's a perfect weekend getaway. For killers, it's the perfect place to hide a body. On a winter day, Jeff was exploring a remote campground when he stumbled upon a puzzling scene.
I noticed this one little road off to the side, and I saw somebody had set up a camp there. As I pulled up, directly in front of me there was a old panel van. To the left of that was a tent. To the left of the tent there was a very attractive girl sitting there by herself. Her hair was done up. It was curly and long. She appeared to have makeup on. She was looking down, and she very slowly raised her head, and we had eye contact.
What are you looking at, man? What's your problem, man? What's your problem? What are you looking at?
Jeff's side trip had suddenly taken a frightening turn.
What's your problem, man? Yeah, leave! Get out of here!
I never thought about calling the police, nor did I think that these guys were really dangerous to anybody. I thought they were being protective of their camp.
Just over a year later, the Los Angeles County coroner was called to investigate a possible murder site. Skeletal remains were found only 50 yards from where Jeff had seen the young blonde woman. The coroner checked dental records of missing people in the LA area and found a match. The remains were identified as 20-year-old Kimberly Pandelios, who had disappeared a year before. It was a tragic end to a promising young life. When she disappeared, Kimberly was living in Southern California. She was taking business classes and worked part-time as a model.
She was loved by everybody in the family, and she was so sweet, so kind. The very end of her life, I don't want even to think about it.
After her remains were identified, Kimberly's story made headlines on the local news.
The TV was on, and I said, that's the girl. That's the girl I saw sitting there. In my mind, there was no doubt that the girl on TV was the same I saw in the camp. Same girl.
Jeff called authorities and took them to the spot where he had seen Kimberly. But too much time had passed, and there were no clues left behind. The coroner could not determine what caused Kimberly's death. Police only knew that she was no longer a missing person. Her case was reclassified as a probable homicide. Detectives learned that the day before Jeff saw Kimberly, a burnt-out car was found near a campground in the Angeles forest.
You can see where they torched it from this side.
The fire was started in the passenger compartment on the passenger side of the front seat. We were able to determine that the front seat was pulled forward in a position that would be as if she drove to that location.
They found a charred spiral notebook in the car. It belonged to Kimberly Pandilios. After running a DMV check on the plates, the police were able to contact Kimberly's husband, who had already reported his wife missing. A few weeks later, 2 hikers found a second notebook under a nearby bridge. It was Kimberly's day runner, but it didn't provide investigators with any fingerprints or other clues. It is believed that a third notebook belonging to Kimberly is still missing.
Rita, did you talk to Kimberly?
Investigators did have one lead. On the day she disappeared, a man named Paul had called Kimberly
No.
at home.
What happened after that?
Well, this Paul called again about 7 p.m. Kimberly still wasn't home. He said she'd left her appointment book when she met with him.
The notebook that Paul has is probably the most valuable notebook. That might have her appointments or contacts for later that day. There's a possibility that Kimberly went up into the mountains to meet someone, and that appointment might be in her book.
Kimberly told her husband that she was scheduled for an outdoor photo shoot. She had responded to an ad in a local newspaper.
A theory is that she drove to that location by herself and met someone to do an outdoor shoot, and that once she was there, she was taken off the road back into the area that she was ultimately found.
Hi, I'm Kimberly.
Ready for a little walk? Come on, let's go! Come on!
Authorities believe Kimberly was abducted sometime on Thursday afternoon. When Jeff drove up, it was just past noon on Saturday.
In retrospect, she might have been drugged, but you just had no idea. If she would have cried out, if she would have said something, if she would have given me an indication she was in trouble, of course I would have done something, but I didn't know. It just gets to me that I didn't do something right then and there to help her. This person basically died because of my inaction or my ignorance. You can't bring the girl back, but I would like justice to be done, of course.
Update. In the case of Kimberly Pandilios, justice has finally been served. 12 years after Kimberly's disappearance, a convicted sex offender, David Rademacher, was arrested for her murder. Authorities tied Rademacher to Kimberly using phone records and were able to make the arrest thanks to the testimony of a teenage girl that he had been harassing. A judge sentenced Rademacher to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Coming up, a World War II disaster results in prison time for 50 sailors charged with mutiny. Are they really guilty? It was the largest and one of the most controversial mutiny trials in U.S. naval history. The defendants were 50 African-American enlisted men who were all found guilty, but they insist that they are innocent and they want to clear their names. Just outside San Francisco, California. During World War II, more than 1 million African Americans served in the military, which at the time was still segregated. In the Navy, they were almost always given the messiest or the most dangerous jobs. At Port Chicago, a Navy weapons center near San Francisco, African American sailors were assigned the risky task of handling bombs and ammunition. even though they had no specialized training. Their superiors often placed bets on whose division could load a ship the fastest. The gambling increased the danger. The bombs were slathered in grease and were extremely difficult to handle. But because winning the bet was top priority, safety precautions were ignored. The sailors were forced to move quickly. Too quickly.
It was hard work, regular work, dangerous work, but I didn't realize how dangerous. We at one point, as a kidding situation, we would say, hey, I'm gonna be the first one out of the ship if it blows up.
I talked to the officers on many occasions concerning the affairs I had, and it was always waved off as insignificant.
Joe's concerns were anything but insignificant. On July 17th, 1944, two massive explosions seconds apart ripped through Port Chicago. The two blasts sent a column of smoke and debris 12,000 feet into the air. The dock and two cargo ships were blown to pieces. 320 people were killed. Every single man in the loading zone.
Man, I'm telling you, it was a sight that you don't want to talk about. And arm here, leg here, head here, shoe with a foot in it, and all that sort of thing. And this is on the water, on the ground, and oh man, it's awful.
3 days later, Rear Admiral Carlton H. Wright praised the Port Chicago seamen for their bravery, and 5 African-American enlisted men were awarded medals. The exact cause of the disaster was never determined. Many of the surviving sailors and their officers were transferred to another munitions depot. But when the order was given to go back to the loading dock, the entire division stopped dead in their tracks.
Seaman, if you're not gonna obey orders, just fall out.
Lieutenant Ernest DeLucchi, the officer in charge, ordered Seaman First Class Joe Small to the front of the formation.
Small, you gonna go back to work?
No, sir. If Small don't go, we're not going either.
It was spontaneous. We had not discussed it. We had not planned it. Each man made up his own mind.
A month later, the 50 men found themselves center stage in one of the largest court-martials in United States naval history. They were charged with conspiracy to commit mutiny during wartime.
I think that what they was trying to do was to set example because we was black. They said, well, maybe the next crew won't do it. If we do this now and we get this under our hats, the next bunch come in here will walk the chalk line.
The chief prosecution witness was Lieutenant DeLucchi.
So I immediately told this man if he wasn't going to obey orders to fall out. And with that, why, practically the whole division fell out.
And then what happened?
In the end, DeLucchi admitted that the men actually obeyed every order he issued except his order to load ammunition. Even so, prosecutors still claim the men were guilty of conspiracy to mutiny.
There's no such charge under naval jurisdiction of conspiracy to attempt mutiny. There is a charge of mutiny, period. Either you commit mutiny or you don't. I don't think they were any more guilty of mutiny than I was.
Without undergoing the experience of a blast practically unprecedented.
During the trial, the defense tried to introduce the sailors' claims that those in charge showed absolutely no concern for their safety. But testimony on that point was not allowed. However, during the second week of the trial, a seaman named Ollie Green was given the opportunity to speak freely.
Seaman Green, do you have anything further to say?
I got a couple of things to say, sir. The reason I was afraid to go down and load the ammunition, them officers were racing each division to see who could put on the most tonnage. And I know the way they was handling the ammunition, it was liable to go off again. If we didn't work fast at the time, they wanted to put us in the brig. And when the exec came down to the docks, they wanted us to slow up. That's the exact way. Put it on fast, or they want to throw us in the brig. That's my reason for not going down there.
Ollie Green's statement became part of the permanent trial record. But it had no effect on the outcome. A verdict was reached after just 80 minutes of deliberation. Guilty as charged.
Seaman Small, please stand. To be confined for a period of 15 years, then to be dishonorably discharged from the United States Naval Services. And to suffer all...
The other 49 men were also convicted. Each received the same sentence as Joe Small. 15 years in prison. The verdicts caused a nationwide outcry. After the war ended, all the men were eventually released, but they had spent almost 2 years in prison.
I believe I did the right thing because my actions were dictated by my own conscience.
I was 18 years old, being chained and shackled. It's no right that can correct the wrongness because it's so deep, it has gone so long, and I've had it kind of wipe it out of my mind. It's the kind of experience that you really don't want to talk about.
For over 50 years, the men convicted of the Port Chicago Mutiny have carried what they feel is an undeserved burden of shame. Update. One of the 50 court-martialed sailors, a man named Freddie Meeks, received a presidential pardon. Meeks was the only sailor to receive a pardon because by then, 48 of the sailors had died and the other survivor declined to participate in the pardon effort. Congressman George Miller was present at the trial, and he has petitioned the president for pardons for the rest of the sailors who have died. A decision has yet to be made. In a moment, a murderer escapes from prison with the help of a quiet, church-going housewife. Wellsville, Pennsylvania. Diane Broadbeck, a 43-year-old housewife, lives in this small Pennsylvania town. She is a devout Christian and very active in her local church. One spring day, Diane disappears. A month later, her abandoned car is found in a nearby motel parking lot. In the trunk, the police find her overnight bag. The same day that Diane vanishes, a long-term inmate at a local prison escapes. His name is John Yount, and he has been serving a life sentence for the brutal murder of an 18-year-old schoolgirl. At the exact time that he escapes, Diane is seen a half a mile from the prison, driving along the same country road where Yount vanishes.
I don't know if Diane's alive. I hope she's alive. I really do. I believe personally that she is alive, and I think she is with John.
Diane was a respected member of her church and community, and apparently she was happily married. Well, then why would she vanish without a word? There are two theories. Diane was either kidnapped by a desperate prisoner, or she willingly helped the convicted murderer escape.
I know my daughter. She would not deliberately help a convicted murderer escape from prison. My daughter would not do this.
Yes, I think my wife probably did help John Yount get out of jail under pressure. For what reason, I don't know. It's hard to say. She could have been threatened by John Yount. I don't know what happened. I really don't.
Diane and her husband, Chester, had two daughters, and had just celebrated their silver wedding anniversary. Diane worked as a bank manager, and as one of her many community activities, she wrote letters to prisoners who had no family or friends. 16 years earlier, John Yount had been convicted of raping and murdering a teenage girl. He was sentenced to life in prison. In time, Yount began writing to Diane.
Hi, my precious lady. I wanted you to be close to me so much today. I hope my enjoyment and adoration of you is an incentive to be the best you can. You are a classy lady. I miss you and love you, John.
John Yount was a model prisoner. He played organ for the choir, a former math teacher. He taught in the prison school.
Around here, it was very easy for him to be liked, and he had a real good manner about him in terms of getting involved with people. John is a strong-willed person and very persuasive. I believe that he could probably persuade almost anybody, given the right opportunity and given the right time. He has a lot of skill in being able to manipulate people.
Diane then began visiting Yount at the local jail and continued to see him even when he was transferred to a prison over 2 hours away.
She was his girlfriend, definitely. It was not a casual visit like a brother and sister visiting. When they started their visit, they would embrace and kiss, and the same when they left.
I'm fine. I'm always fine when I see you.
You look great.
Thank you.
Diane talks about John Yount. I know she was writing him. I know she visited him. But that's about all. It was just a little bit as far as I knew.
On Valentine's Day, Yount wrote to Diane,
"Be my Valentine, love. Forever. You are my heart. I hope more than anything that this is the last Valentine Day that we will spend apart."
Yount eventually earned the right to work unsupervised outside the prison fence. One day, he decided to take advantage of that privilege.
The morning of the escape, John was to go out and cut some hay.
All you have to do is take this hay wagon down to the garden barn. I'll be back in a moment.
That was the last time John Yount was ever seen.
I was on my way up over Ritual Hill there, heading for the bowling alley. And I seen this car come down, and I just casually looked over, and I thought, that girl looks familiar. It's like John Yount's girlfriend. So I thought to myself, what is she doing on this road?
And that was the last time that Diane Broadbeck was ever seen.
Yes, sir.
Broderick?
Yes, sir.
Sergeant Duggar from the Pennsylvania State Police. This is Trooper Robert Scudder.
Yes, sir.
When the troopers came to my door on Sunday, wanting to know where my wife was, saying that Yount had been broken out of prison by someone, or thinking it was her, as far as I was concerned, they were completely wrong. She had nothing to do with it.
However, police discovered that Diane had a secret bank account and had withdrawn $7,500 in the weeks just before she disappeared.
We discovered that she also placed a car into a youth storage facility, and that car was placed in there within 2 weeks prior to the escape. And we discovered that there was telephone contact with John Yount between she and he at the prison. The night before the escape, there was a 14-minute conversation which occurred. At that point in time, we decided to file charges against her in assisting John Yount.
A month after Yount's escape, Diane's car was discovered at the local motel. A bag was found in the trunk containing her jewelry, cosmetics, and over a dozen pairs of underwear.
There is a theory that John used Diane as an instrument of his escape. He discovers that he is not going to get out of the prison system. He has a woman on the outside who can do things for him. She does them. He then kills her. He would be gone free and clear. The other theory is that she really loved him, and he really loved her. That theory is one that I hold. I believe she is with him.
Well, if my wife has run off with another man, it's for sure I do not like it, that's for sure, you know. We were married for 25 years, and I thought they were fairly good years, you know, and I don't think she's alive. Because I think if she is, she would contact somebody in the family.
I will never even think that she is dead. I know she's alive. I think of nothing else but my missing daughter, and I want her back.
Update. After we aired this story, authorities learned that John Yount and Diane Broadbeck were living in Boise, Idaho, under assumed names. Yount was sent back to prison to serve the remainder of his life sentence. Broadbeck pled guilty to helping Yount escape and received a sentence of 2 to 5 years. She was released after serving 2 years. Next, a little girl is cured of a deadly disease. Her treatment? A priest thought to have healing powers. Sometimes the journey from sickness to health is mysterious. Every so often, a dramatic recovery is attributed to divine intervention. In these cases, medical science has no answer, especially for those patients who have been helped by Father Ralph DiOrio. At Father Ralph DiOrio's prayer meetings, worshipers often fall to the floor. It's common to see dozens of people sprawled around the room. Some call it the slaying of the Spirit. They say that it is a total surrender to the power of God.
Christina was born with neurofibromatosis.
Stan Umowski and his family speak from experience when they talk about the extraordinary power of Father DiOrio's prayers.
It's a degenerative genetic disorder.
Christina.
Their ordeal began a few weeks before Christmas, when Stan's wife, Mary, was cleaning the house.
Sleepyhead, did you have a good nap? Christina.
I walked over to her, and her eyes were kind of staring up at the ceiling, and she didn't respond to me.
Sweetie, can you hear me?
Her eyes were open, but she wasn't acknowledging me. She wasn't saying anything, and she was just making this little gurgling sound in her throat.
Christina? Sweetie, come on, baby. Come on. Honey?
As I dialed the doctor, that's when she started convulsing. Not a wild convulsion, it was basically a tremor on one side of her body.
Sweetie, Christina? Okay, it's all right. It's okay.
I don't know what told me to start timing it. I remember it started at 1 o'clock that day, December 1st, and the seizure lasted for 20 minutes.
I'm sorry, but the news is not good. Christina is suffering with neurofibromatosis.
The specialists all agreed the disease was incurable. It would damage Christina's vision and coordination and ultimately kill her.
We sat down and we cried for weeks on end. Tears would just come to our eyes at any time during the day or night. We couldn't sleep. We were devastated by it.
As expected, Christina's health deteriorated.
There's certain things she would not be able to do at all. Skipping, forget about it. Running, I mean, the coordination wasn't there to do any of these things. Jumping, she couldn't get her feet off the ground.
A friend suggested that the family attend one of Father DiOrio's prayer meetings. Stan was quite skeptical, but he was willing to do anything for his daughter.
I still had some anger in me. Even though I agreed to go, I carried a tape recorder in my pocket and I taped the entire service, thinking that if this man is a fraud, I'll expose him.
Are there any children out there who are suffering? Please raise your hand.
Father! Right here, Father!
Yes. Do you have a sick child?
Yes, Father, my daughter.
I was so excited and thrilled just for the fact that they got called forward. You know, after seeing a number of people there, I thought our chances of even being called or having Christina blessed were almost nil.
Sweetheart, what is your name?
Christina.
Christina. Now, Christina, do you believe in Jesus?
Yes.
There are three types of healing. There's the physical healing, the spiritual healing, and the psychological healing. So God is aiming for all three of these healings to give this person a new chance, a new chapter in the autobiography of that person's life, you see.
Stan and Mary were hoping for a miracle, but they had no idea what one might look like or feel like.
Mommy, how did that man do that?
Do what, Christina?
When that man touched me on my head, he made me feel hot.
And then I remembered what Father Diorio had said during the service about people feeling a warmth in their body. And then, only then, me, who was all bundled up, I was so cold. I looked at her, her hood was down, no gloves on, her coat was hanging open.
Within 2 days, it appeared their prayers had been answered.
Right on the front stoop of this school, she starts jumping rope. And her feet are not just an inch off the ground, she's literally jumping a half a foot off the ground. And not just a couple of jumps. She's jumping and she's jumping. And I'm looking at her in like disbelief, and she calls out to me, "Mommy, how can I do this all of a sudden?" Her words, all of a sudden.
Hello. 2 weeks later, Christina's doctor called them with the results from her latest MRI.
Well, how much is it going down? We went to see the doctor in person, and I said, "Well, doctor, show me where the tumor is. You said it was greatly reduced. Please show me where the tumor is." And he put his finger on this one. He said, "Well, this is where it was."
We asked the doctor not connected with this case to examine 2 of Christina's MRIs. One was from almost a year before Christina visited Father Diorio. It shows the tumor as a thickening on the part of the brain called the optic chiasm. The second MRI was from shortly after Father Diorio's blessing.
Christina's MRI scan in the region of the optic chiasm appears to be normal. It appears that the thickening of the optic chiasm has disappeared when compared with the previous exam. In neurofibromatosis, there have been rare instances of regression of optic nerve gliomas, but this is a rare event.
Washing all the dishes in the sink.
Recent MRIs confirm that ever since Father Diorio blessed Christina, the life-threatening tumor has not returned.
I thank God every day for what he's done for us. I thank Father Diorio for being the catalyst in that healing. It absolutely, positively was a miracle. And I could never thank him enough for that.
Father Ralph Diorio emphasizes that any miracle is God's work, not his.
It appears that God has chosen me openly, clearly, publicly, and all he needed from me was, "Okay, Lord, I'm willing to be your instrument of speech, of thought, of touch." So I become the visible presence of God. But God is the divine healer.
Next, a woman's search for her missing grandmother reveals a mysterious legend of murder. Brookfield, Wisconsin, the early 1900s. 38-year-old Conradina Olson says goodbye to her 4 children.
And Gus, I'll see you tomorrow.
She tells them that she's going to a doctor's appointment in Milwaukee and will be back the next day.
You sure you don't want to come along?
No, I'd rather stay here.
Goodbye, children.
The Olsen children don't know it yet, but they are seeing their mother for the last time. Conradina's oldest son, Edwin, will regret his decision not to go with her for the rest of his life.
He felt that if he had went with her, she would have been back. She would have come back to them. My father, he suffered for this all of his life. He never knew why she went away and didn't come back.
Decades later, Geneva Foxer began investigating her grandmother's disappearance. She was hoping to find answers to the questions that had haunted her father his entire life. She learned that in 1891, 20-year-old Conradina married 30-year-old Carl Olsen, a railroad coachman.
Would you listen to me when I'm talking to you?
It was common knowledge that their marriage was unhappy.
That back in those days, when there was a bad marriage, people didn't get a divorce. One of the people just walked away from the marriage. And this is actually what I had thought for many years that had happened to her. But now I don't. I feel she was taken. Something bad had to have happened to her.
One day at work, Geneva had a bizarre encounter with a customer.
This lady come into my store. I knew there was something different about her, but I couldn't grasp what it was. And we got to talking. She told me her name was Susanna. And she says, well, I'm a psychic. And just out of a clear blue sky, she said, you want to ask me about your grandmother, don't you? And I was amazed. I said, yes. And she said, do you have anything of your grandmother's here? And I said, yes. I said, I have a marriage license, and I said, I have their wedding picture. And she closed her eyes, and she says, now don't talk, be very quiet. And then all of a sudden, she said, I can see her boarding a train. I can see children crying. I can see her being beaten. And I feel that your grandfather knows what happened to her. It just kind of sent shivers down my spine. I was flabbergasted. I thought, I don't believe this. How could she know? How could she know this about my grandmother?
Later, Susanna told Geneva that she would soon be receiving a packet of old letters. They would reveal the year that Geneva's grandmother disappeared.
Ellis has something to do about where
She also told Geneva that the name Ellis was somehow connected to her grandmother and that her grandmother was buried in an unmarked grave.
And she says, also, I see, within a year's time, you will be getting a letter from an unknown source yet not heard from, somebody you don't even know of, that is going to tell you where this grave is.
Several weeks later, a package arrived. It was sent by Conradina's nieces and nephews, relatives Geneva had never met.
I did get a packet of old letters from in the 1800s. And within these old letters, it states there was some dissension in the marriage, and it also states that the last known heard from her was around 1910.
Geneva sent an account of her grandmother's disappearance to a local newspaper, and they printed it. To one reader, it sounded familiar.
I got in contact with Geneva when I read a piece in a monthly magazine that she was looking for her grandmother.
Bill Carpenter told Geneva about the unmarked grave of a woman. It was in a small Missouri town by the name of Ellis.
And he says it is an unmarked grave, and it's along the railroad right-of-way. And when he said it's along the railroad right-of-way, I couldn't believe it. Tears come to my eyes. I just wanted to cry. Now, this was another prediction of Susanna's that came true.
At the turn of the century, Ellis was a small farming town. According to local legend, one day a fashionably dressed woman got off the train there. She was seen arguing with a man. Witnesses said it appeared to be a lover's quarrel and that the couple headed down the tracks. The man was later seen returning to the station alone. He boarded another train and left town. 3 days later, the woman's body was found alongside the train tracks. She had been murdered. There was nothing to identify her or to give any indication where she came from. Locals say that workers for the railroad buried the body a few yards from where she was found. Geneva has come to believe that this mysterious woman is her grandmother, Conradina.
I want to think this is my grandmother's grave. In my heart, I think it is. And I don't know what else could have happened to my grandmother. I think with all my research, I would have found out something.
However, a newspaper article about a woman murdered near the Ellis train tracks seems to contradict Geneva's theory. The account appeared in 1888, years before Conradina Olson disappeared. Long ago, there was a young woman who was murdered in Ellis, Missouri. Could it have been Conradina Olson?
The way this is all coming about, I don't know what to think about it. I feel that there's somebody out there that knows what happened to her, and I just want to know.
Perhaps Conradina did wave goodbye to her children and head off to a new life. Or maybe she was murdered and buried in an unmarked grave next to the railroad tracks in Ellis, Missouri. If you have any information about this story or any of the other cases we profiled, please log on to our website at unsolved.com.